Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Mother Riley Meets the Vampire, aka Vampire Over London, 1952. The world's most famous vampire versus the world's most famous washerwoman. From this humble premise, Bela Lugosi and Old Mother Riley alter ego Arthur Lucan matched wits in an unlikely pairing that, even more surprisingly, turns out to be more fun than you'd expect. By 1951, Lugosi's movie career was in free fall. He had survived the 9 Circles of Hell, the infamous Monogram 9 series of shoddy Poverty Row studio movies. He had pulled himself out of the death spiral with an appearance for Val Lewton in The Body Snatchers, which I covered in episode 157, then plummeted down again with RKO's abysmal unofficial sequel to Lewton's I Walked with a Zombie, called Zombies on Broadway, and then briefly leveled off with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein in 1948, all of which I've covered in previous episodes. This single-handedly revived the duo's names and those of the Universal Monster Gallery, but it did nothing for one of their OG icons. Consequently, it was another 3 years before Lugosi would shoot another feature, a drought so disastrous that he requested withdrawal status from the American Screen Actors Guild, as he had almost no movie work in that whole period. Meanwhile, to make ends meet, over the years he had continually recycled the stage show of Dracula around the States, and had just ended a theater circuit in his horror and magic stage show to extend what marquee value there was left in his brand. Lugosi experts Gary D. Rhodes and Bill Kaffenberger describe in their book No Traveler Returns how producer Richard Gordon saw an opportunity. He and his brother Alex suggested Lugosi should come over and star in a London theatre season of Dracula, leading to Broadway. The actor was naturally enthusiastic. However, finding no takers, the brothers had to scale back their glittering goal to a more modest UK provincial tour, in the hope that this in turn would spark interest in a West End run. Sadly, the project bore uncomfortable parallels to Lugosi's screen fortunes. Gordon recalled that the British company was counting so strongly on Bela's name to carry the show that they had skimped horribly on every other aspect of the tour. Sets, costumes, and the supporting cast smacked of Poverty Row. The tour folded before it even began, leaving Lugosi and his wife Lillian stranded in England, their hopes and bank balances crushed after such a warm welcome by the British press. Richard Gordon came to the rescue with a movie offer whose $5,000 would at least pay for their passage home, the last in the low-budget series of popular British Old Mother Riley comedy films starring Arthur Lucan and directed by John Gilling, who later went on to direct Hammer's Plague of the Zombies. It's worth taking a little look at Lucan's path through showbiz and how it compares to his screen partner. I can't find any account of whether they got on during filming, but I'd like to think their backgrounds afforded some points in common. Born Arthur Toll in a tiny cottage in Sibsey, Lincolnshire in 1885, Lucan was almost an exact contemporary to Lugosi, who was born 3 years earlier. One of 7 children, he almost didn't survive, having contracted scarlet fever at 2 weeks old. An indomitable spirit, he grew up fascinated by the stage, and when an outbreak of measles hit Boston, the shortage of actors gained Toll a walk-on part in a pantomime at Shodfriars Theatre. In 1910, he was in Dublin, playing the circuit with the musical Cliftons, and here he spied a young 13-year-old girl singing in Henry's Arcade. He was instantly smitten with her dark ringlets and charming singing voice. This was Kitty McShane, already a seasoned performer around the pubs and full of self-confidence. It was the beginning of a tempestuous relationship that, for better or worse, would last the rest of his life. Kitty was out courting with him the day he decided to change his name. In the Dublin suburb of Lucan, he saw the sign for Lucan Dairies, and decided from then on he would be Arthur Lucan. He began his theatrical career of female impersonation in 1912 as the pantomime character Mrs. O'Finn. A year later, Kitty married him, and together they toured for the next 20 years, across Britain, Australia, and New Zealand in the show British Night Out. It honed the dynamic of their dueling personas as the haranguing harridan Old Mother Riley and bemused daughter Kitty to great comedic effect. ultimately spawning their long-running cinema series of 15 feature films in the roles. Lucan had a remarkable physical agility on stage that his films preserved well. There's a great sequence in 1938's Old Mother Riley in Paris where he interrupts a French Apache dance to berate the male and allows himself to be swung about with such bodily relaxation that it looks like footage of a dummy. Most famously on stage, waiting for her daughter's return from a date night with boyfriend Danny, Old Mother Riley was a mesmerizing cyclone of accusatory energy and explosive gesticulation, besieging innocent Kitty like a compulsively voguing prosecution attorney. "I want an explanation. I demand an explanation. Where have you been? Who have you been with? What have you been doing? It's a lie." In the documentary Arthur and Kitty, much-loved comedy actor Brian Murphy, who played Lucan in the drama Arthur Lucan, On Your Way, Riley, revealed that this mirrored their actual married life, with Kitty's boyfriend even sharing the same name. How much his situation fueled his on-stage fervor is anyone's guess, but Lucan and McShane's fates were inextricably lashed together in their shared careers for many years of toxic codependency. She was, by all accounts, and it seems all accounts, a terrible person to encounter, riddled with jealousy at his fame eclipsing what she thought was her due. Poignantly, only Arthur could tolerate her, no matter how awfully she treated him. In a forum discussion at the National Theatre Museum, available on YouTube, actors in Lucan's stage company were asked for someone to come to her defense, but the only words they could recall ever being used to describe her by anyone was a bitch. Bela Lugosi had no such corrosive home life, though in common with Lucan, he served a long stage apprenticeship, then shot to film prominence with the transfer of his most famous stage character, and equally late in life. He was 49 when Dracula made him a movie star and gave him a persona he could exploit. Arthur Lucan was 52 when the feature film Old Mother Riley did the same for him in England. By the time of their shooting together, they were both of pensionable age, yet you'd never guess it from their performances. Lugosi appears to enjoy himself greatly, looking much healthier than you'd expect 4 years before his fatal deterioration. He also seems to be sporting the same fetching black silk shirt I admired on him in Chandu the Magician, episode 239. Lucan, too, is still a whirling dervish of physical dynamism. Even more head-spinning was the range of titles the movie was released under. Whatever name was used, the titles slightly misrepresented both men, and there were at least 6 different ones I counted. There is Old Mother Riley meets the vampire, Mother Riley meets the vampire, he had dropped the aging prefix for this final one, My Son the Vampire, which makes it sound like a proud Jewish mother's introduction, Carry On Vampire, The Robot and the Vampire, and Vampire Over London. No matter how they positioned Lugosi, though, there was no caped bloodsucker anywhere in the movie, just as well as any logic like the plot vaporizes under the withering sunlight of close inspection. It opens with the excruciatingly jaunty movie pop tune My Son the Vampire by Alan Sherman, which ties in with the title but sounds too old and too awful to be a pop single, much like the dreadful Carry On Screaming title song. A news vendor's board asks, "Another girl missing. Is it the vampire?" To answer this, screenwriter Val Valentine tips off the head of New Scotland Yard with an exposition dump about the recent arrival of Professor von Hoosen, descended from a baron whom legend immortalized as a vampire. For reasons of his own, von Hoosen claims to be an earthly reproduction of his notorious ancestor. Well, it's one way to shoehorn in Lugosi, and with a rumored sideline of drinking the blood of women, we should be impressed that he's multitasking as both mad scientist and Prince of Darkness. The Chief certainly isn't. Fans of graceless movie dialogue will cherish his dismissal as a fanatical scientist with a stupid gang of men. Von Hoosen's plan is to take over the world using an army of killer robots in pursuit of a map of uranium deposits, a bewilderingly over-engineered mission that scuppered when one of them is delivered to the wrong address by mistake. Whose address? Yes, it's the chaotic Mother Riley. By this point on screen, Lucan was without Kitty McShane for the first time, having divorced her acrimoniously that year, but his sheer force of personality easily fills that vacuum. His alter ego is equally defiant at hearing what appears to be a blood-drinking vampire on the loose. What a thirst, she muses. She's also a nimble deflector of debt, too, fending off the rent collector with the charmingly winsome ditty, I lift up my finger and I say tweet tweet, accompanied by the dainty dance steps of future comedy stars Dandy Nichols and Hattie Jakes. At the news of her Uncle Jeremiah's death inheritance, she's primed for a parcel. Before she gets her special delivery, though, Lugosi's Dracula connection is staked further by establishing him in his creepy mansion in the Count's elegant evening wear, a fondness for sleeping thus dressed in a coffin and equipped with a fawning Renfield-like manservant Hitchcock, Ian Wilson. He is, however, more inclined to share his master plan with his goateed henchman Anton, Philip Lever, whom we last saw channeling similar European skullduggery in The Lady Vanishes. Von Heusen proudly shows Anton his high-tech weaponry, which consists of 3 dials on a board that can somehow be turned to destroy planes, battleships, and a switch that governs 50,000 robots he hasn't actually built yet. Well, what do we expect from a megalomaniac inventor? Realistic schedules? He confesses to his suave servant that this is where the uranium comes in. To aid his machine machinations, he takes delivery of what he thinks is his prototype robot, prefacing the crate opening with a little in-joke swipe at Lugosi's universal competition. No Frankenstein, with all the weaknesses of the flesh. He declaims too soon, though, when he finds he's been sent Mother Riley's uncle's keepsakes from Ireland instead. She, meanwhile, gets the better end of the mix-up. Instead of a banjo and a bed warmer, she receives a clunky, low-budget Robbie the Robot with an exposed brain and a radio transmitter that broadcasts news reports and sends him home to his master with her in tow. Von Heusen studies her medical charts before meeting her and concludes, a poor specimen, but the right group. Lugosi's scenes with Lucan are a pleasure. When he sees her admiring a hilariously bad portrait of Dracula's winged alter ego, he leans in lasciviously, sucking every drop of parody value from, "Do you like bats?" She is so bowled over by the rare attentions of a gentleman that she allows him to bolster her blood levels with repeated courses of liver. After all, Britain was still in the throes of rationed meat after World War II, until she can't eat another piece. The rest of the plot is an enjoyable overdose of rich nonsense of its own, along the way throwing in an obstacle course of excellent British character comedy actors, such as Richard Wattis as a snooping policeman, a nice change of pace from his usual white-collar snobbish officials, and the pleasingly vacant Dora Bryan, who can make no more sense of her new crazy Hungarian employer than we can. After a high-speed chase climax reminiscent of Benny Hill, the escaping Lugosi is cornered in a shipboard shootout at the docks, and Mother Riley is catapulted into the sea, croaking through a rubber ring, "It's the end!" It was indeed, and in more ways than one. Whilst Lucan continued to tour as his much-loved other identity, there were no more film outings in the role. Kitty McShane still plagued him despite their divorce, and a crippling bankruptcy haunted him. He died the way many stage actors claim that they'd like to go, in the wings of the Tivoli Theatre Hull, just before going on to perform in May 1954. Bela Lugosi outlived him by just a couple of years, before dying under less romantic circumstances, following a grinding poverty of finances and opportunities. Still, for a little while here, 2 immortal showbiz legends met across the Atlantic and together had fun as their best selves. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.